The world was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the silence that came after destruction. The once great palace of the alien kingdom was now only broken walls and black smoke rising into the sky. Rubble covered the ground, and the air smelled of fire and dust. In the middle of that wreckage, one sound broke the silence, the cry of a baby. It was sharp, desperate, and carried across the ruins. The sound came from deep inside a half-fallen hall, where the alien princess crouched behind a cracked pillar. She held her baby close to her chest, trying to hush the little one. Her arms shook, not from weakness but from fear. The princess's eyes were wide, filled with worry. She was young, with soft features that once knew comfort and honor but now only knew loss. Her royal robes were torn, her silver crown broken. Her people had been scattered, her guards slain, her throne taken. She had only one thing left, the small, crying child in her arms. As she rocked the baby, her ears picked up another sound, footsteps, heavy, slow, echoing against the stone floors. She froze. Enemies were still searching the ruins. If they found her, it would be the end for both her and her child. But when the figure appeared from the shadows, it was not one of her enemies. It was a human soldier. His uniform was dirty, his armor cracked, and his weapon slung over his shoulder. He looked tired, like someone who had walked through fire and had no place left to go. He was alone, separated from his unit, just as lost as she was. The soldier stopped when he saw her. His eyes went to the princess first, then to the baby. He lifted his weapon slowly, ready in case of danger. The princess pulled her child closer, glaring with the pride of royalty even in her fear. She whispered in her language, words of warning, though she knew he might not understand. Then the baby cried again, louder this time, shaking the ruined hall with its helpless voice. The soldier's hand froze on his weapon. He stared at the child, his expression changing. Something in his face softened. He lowered his gun. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two survivors from different worlds, unsure what to do. The soldier moved carefully, showing his empty hand. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small metal canteen. Unscrewing the top, he poured a few drops of water onto his palm, then crouched down and stretched his hand toward the baby. The princess tensed. She almost pulled back, but then she saw her child's tiny mouth move toward the drops. The baby's crying slowed, replaced by little gasps as it sucked the water from the human's rough hand. The princess stared at the soldier in silence. She had been told stories of humans all her life, stories of their violence, their greed, their dangerous nature. Yet here, in the ruins of her kingdom, one human was kneeling in front of her, giving his water to her child. The soldier spoke, then his voice low and steady. The princess did not understand the words, but she heard the tone. It was not harsh. It was calm, gentle, almost like the way a father spoke to his own child. The baby relaxed, resting in the princess's arms, and for the first time since the attack began, the little one stopped crying. The silence that followed was heavy, but different from before. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of two strangers realizing they were not enemies. The soldier sat down slowly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. He pulled out a small packet of rations and broke off a piece, eating it to show it was safe. Then he placed a bit of it on the floor and pushed it toward her. The princess looked at the food, then back at him. Hunger pressed against her pride, and she finally reached out, taking it. She chewed slowly, her eyes never leaving his. For a long time, they did not speak. They only listened to the distant rumble of falling stone, to the far-off shouts of enemy scouts, and to the soft breathing of the baby now asleep. In that quiet hall of ruins, something unexpected had happened. A fragile bond had formed, not of trust, not yet, but of necessity. The princess needed protection. The soldier, though he had no duty to her, could not turn away from a mother and child. The baby shifted in sleep, making a small sound. The soldier's eyes softened again, and he let out a breath he had been holding. He leaned his back against the broken wall, setting his weapon across his knees. The princess studied him carefully. He looked different from her people, his skin, his eyes, his posture. Yet when the baby had cried, he had moved as if the child's pain was his own. That, she realized, was something that needed no translation. Outside, the war still raged. Soldiers marched, machines roared, and fire spread. But in this one broken corner of the palace, there was only a princess, her baby, and a human soldier who had chosen not to walk away. For the first time since her kingdom fell, the princess felt a spark of hope. It was fragile, like a candle, flame in the wind, but it was there. Perhaps, she thought, the baby's cry had not been a curse. Perhaps it had been a call, and the answer had come from the most unlikely place of all. The night grew colder as the ruins around them settled into silence. The soldier stayed close to the wall, keeping his weapon within reach. The princess sat across from him, still holding her baby. The faint glow of distant fires lit their faces, but neither of them spoke. The princess's eyes never left the soldier. She did not know what to make of him. Humans were supposed to be wild, dangerous, unpredictable, yet this one had not harmed her. Instead, he had given water to her child and even shared his food. Still, her heart would not let her fully trust him. The soldier, on the other hand, was watching the shadows. His training had made him careful. Every small sound put him on edge. Every flicker of light made him tighten his grip. But when he looked at the princess and the sleeping child, his expression softened. He could have walked away earlier, but something kept him there. He could not leave a baby in danger. Hours passed, in silence until the baby stirred again, crying softly in its sleep. The princess rocked the little one gently, whispering lullabies in her language. The soldier listened. Though he did not understand the words, the melody was clear. It was the sound of comfort, the sound of a mother's love. At last, he spoke. His words were slow, quiet. The princess tilted her head, not understanding. She replied in her own tongue, her tone firm and commanding. Both realized the problem. They shared no language. The soldier frowned, then tried again. He pointed to himself, tapping his chest. "David," he said. He repeated it, slower this time. "David." The princess hesitated. She understood his meaning. He was telling her his name. Slowly, she pointed to herself. "Eliara," she whispered. Her voice was soft but proud. Then she touched the baby's head. "Kaelin." David repeated their names carefully, making sure he pronounced them as close as possible. "Eliara. Kaelin." His voice was rough, but there was respect in it. The princess studied him and gave a small nod. It was the first step. The next morning, the sun rose weakly over the broken city. Smoke hung in the sky, and the sound of marching boots echoed in the distance. The enemy was still searching. Eliara knew they could not stay hidden much longer. She shifted Kaelin into a sling across her chest and stood. David rose too, checking the ammunition on his weapon. He motioned toward the ruins outside, then back to her, making it clear. They had to move. Eliara did not trust him, but she had little choice. Alone, she would not survive. With him, there was at least a chance. She gave a small, reluctant nod. Together, they left the hall, stepping carefully over broken stones. David moved. Ahead, scanning every corner, every shadow. Eliara followed closely, her child pressed against her heart. Each step felt heavy, but she kept moving. As they crossed the ruins, Eliara watched David. He moved with purpose, trained to notice danger before it came. More than once he raised a hand to stop her, crouching low when enemy scouts passed nearby. They waited in silence until the patrols moved on, then continued forward. At one point they reached a collapsed bridge. The gap was wide, too far for Eliara to cross with Kaelin in her arms. She looked at David with sharp, doubtful eyes when he held out his arms. He was asking her to trust him with the baby. Her chest tightened. Every instinct told her to refuse. This child was her heir, her future, her last reason to fight. But the sound of approaching engines forced her hand. If she did not move quickly, they would all be caught. With trembling hands, she placed Kaylin into David's arms. The soldier's grip was steady, careful, not rough. He cradled the infant as if it were something precious. Without hesitation, he crossed the gap using a narrow beam, his steps sure despite the danger. On the other side, he waited, holding Kaylin close until Ilyara crossed after him. When she reached the other side, he returned the baby without a word. She clutched her child tightly, her heart racing, but she saw something new in David's eyes: honor. Hours turned into a day. Together they moved through abandoned streets, destroyed homes, and burned marketplaces. The princess saw how David never once turned his back on danger. Whenever they heard movement, he shielded her and Kaylin, placing himself in harm's way first. That night they found shelter in an old tunnel. David lit a small fire, using scraps of broken furniture. Ilyara sat with Kaylin, watching the flames. Her stomach growled softly, and David noticed. He pulled another ration from his pack and offered it. She took it this time without hesitation. Hunger had worn down her pride, and she knew he was not trying to trick her. She even broke a small piece and gave it back to him, a gesture of silent thanks. Later, Kaylin began to fuss again. David leaned closer, humming a tune from his own world. It was simple, a soft rhythm soldiers used to calm themselves in the trenches. To Ilyara's surprise, the baby quieted almost immediately, tiny eyes closing in peace. The princess stared at David for a long time. Something inside her shifted. She still did not trust him completely, but she could not deny the truth. This human was different. He had no reason to help her, yet he did. He had no duty to protect Kaylin, yet he risked his life at every turn. When David finally leaned back against the tunnel wall and closed his eyes, Ilyara whispered something under her breath. It was a word from her language, a word that meant guardian. Kaylin slept peacefully between them, unaware of the dangers outside. And though Ilyara's heart was still heavy with fear and doubt, she began to wonder if fate had brought this human soldier to her for a reason. The uneasy alliance was still fragile, but it was real. And in the middle of a broken world, it was the only hope she had. The tunnel carried them far beneath the ruined city. The air was heavy with dust, and every step echoed against the stone. David led the way, his weapon raised, his eyes sharp. Ilyara followed closely, Kaylin strapped to her chest, her steps light and careful. The baby slept peacefully, as if the darkness itself offered comfort. For a long while they walked without speaking. Ilyara's mind was full of questions. Why was this human soldier still with her? What did he gain by protecting a princess who had nothing left? No throne, no army, no power. She wanted to ask, but the barrier of language made it impossible. David, too, had his own thoughts. He had lost his squad in the battle days earlier. He had seen friends fall, and he had believed his mission was over. But then he found her, an alien princess with a crying baby, and somehow his purpose had returned. Protecting them gave him a reason to keep moving forward. The tunnel opened at last into the broken streets outside the city walls. Fire burned in the distance. The night sky glowed red with smoke, and the sound of engines rumbled through the air. Enemy patrols were everywhere. David crouched low, signaling Ilyara to stay behind him. He scanned the streets, then motioned for her to follow. Step by step, they moved between collapsed walls and burned-out vehicles. Every shadow could hide danger, but they pressed forward. At one point they heard voices. Ilyara's heart froze. Enemy soldiers were searching nearby. David pulled her into the cover of a half-broken wall and raised his finger to his lips, telling her to stay silent. Kaylin stirred, beginning to whimper. Panic rose in Ilyara's chest. Before the sound grew louder, David leaned closer. He reached out slowly, his hand brushing the baby's head gently. He whispered something in his language, soft and calming, almost like a lullaby. Ilyara was shocked, but Kaylin quieted again, eyes closing in sleep. The danger passed as the patrol moved on. Ilyara looked at David differently after that. She had seen warriors fight. She had seen men kill, but never had she seen someone calm a child so naturally in the middle of danger. A part of her heart softened, though she did not want to admit it. They continued their journey, heading toward the outer forests. Eliara knew of a hidden path that could take them to the mountains, where loyal refugees might be hiding. But the way was long, and the dangers were many. By day they moved quickly. By night they found shelter where they could, sometimes in caves, sometimes in ruined houses. David always took the first watch, refusing to rest until he was certain the area was safe. Eliara watched him in those quiet hours, seeing the lines of weariness on his face. He carried heavy burdens too, though he never spoke of them. One afternoon, as they crossed a valley filled with burnt grass, drones flew overhead. Their red lights scanned the ground. David signaled Eliara to drop low. They crawled into a ditch, mud clinging to their clothes. Kalen woke and let out a small cry. David's eyes widened. He pulled a small piece of metal from his pack and tossed it far away. The noise distracted the drones, pulling them toward the sound. Eliara clutched her child close, her heart racing. Once the machines passed, she looked at David in disbelief. He had risked his last tools of survival to keep them safe. Later that night, they rested inside the hollow trunk of a fallen tree. Eliara fed Kalen with what little supplies remained, then sat in silence. David sat across from her, sharpening his knife on a stone. The firelight danced across their faces. Finally, Eliara spoke her first word in his language. It was awkward, broken, but clear enough. Why? David looked up, surprised. He understood her meaning. Why was he doing this? Why was he still with her? He lowered the knife and thought for a moment. Then he pointed to Kalen, who was asleep, in her arms. He placed a hand on his chest and said softly, "Because." It was not a full answer, but it was enough. Eliara's eyes softened. She understood what he meant, even if the words were few. He was not protecting her for gold or for power. He was doing it because the child mattered, because life mattered. The next days grew harder. Food became scarce, and the cold nights cut deep into their bones. Yet even in the struggle, small moments gave them strength. Sometimes Kalen would laugh, a pure sound that broke through the sadness around them. Sometimes David would smile quietly when Eliara told old stories in her language, even though he could not understand. One morning, they reached a river. The bridge was destroyed, and the water rushed wild and dangerous. Eliara's heart sank. Crossing seemed impossible with a baby, but David studied the riverbank and found a fallen tree lying across the current. It was risky, but it was their only chance. He tested the log first, moving carefully across while holding his weapon. Then, he returned and held out his arms. Eliara's stomach tightened again. She remembered the last time she handed Kalen to him. Still, she knew it was the only way. She kissed her child's forehead and placed him into David's arms. The soldier balanced his steps across the log, his grip steady and firm. The river roared below, but he never faltered. Eliara followed, her heart pounding with every step. When they reached the other side, she nearly collapsed with relief. David placed Kalen gently back into her arms. Eliara whispered something in her language, words of thanks. David did not understand, but he smiled anyway. That night, as the stars shone faintly through the smoke-filled sky, Eliara lay awake. She thought of her kingdom, of the people she had lost, and of the future that seemed so uncertain. Yet beside her, a human soldier watched over her and her child, never asking for anything in return. She realized then that trust was no longer a choice. It was already happening. Slowly, silently, she had begun to rely on him, not just for survival, but for hope. And though the journey ahead was long and filled with fire, Eliara felt for the first time that she might not be walking it alone. The forest stretched wide before them. The trees were tall and dark, their branches twisting into the smoky sky. It was quieter here than in the city, but the silence felt heavy. Danger could still be anywhere, behind a tree, above the branches, or waiting on the path ahead. David walked in front, his step steady, his weapon ready. Eliara followed close, Kaelin tied safely to her chest. The baby slept peacefully, his small breaths a reminder of why they kept moving. For both of them, the child had become the center of their journey. The forest gave them cover, but it also brought new challenges. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks making each step hard. Food was almost gone. David had only one ration left, and Eliara's pack held only dried roots and berries she had found on the way. They would not last long. That evening, they found shelter in a hollow cave under a cliff. A small fire flickered in the center, casting long shadows on the walls. Kaelin slept wrapped in Eliara's cloak, while she sat near the flames, her face tired but still proud. David sat across from her, sharpening his blade slowly, his eyes thoughtful. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, Eliara broke the silence. She placed her hand on her chest and spoke in her own language. "Princess," she said slowly, as if teaching him. Then she pointed to the baby. "Air." David paused, listening carefully. He repeated the words clumsily. "Princess Air." Eliara nodded. She then pointed to herself again. "Eliara." Finally, she looked at him. Her eyes were clear, strong. She wanted him to understand who she truly was. Not just a mother, but the last daughter of a royal line. David understood enough. His brows lifted slightly, and he leaned back against the wall. He finally knew the weight of the child she carried. It was not just a baby. It was the last hope of a fallen kingdom. For a moment, Eliara thought he might look at her differently, like a burden or a target. But he only nodded, as if nothing had changed. His calm reaction surprised her. She expected fear or greed, but instead she saw quiet respect. Later that night, as the fire burned low, David spoke. His words were quiet, but his tone carried a deep sadness. Eliara did not understand every sound, but she felt the weight of them. He touched the patch on his torn uniform, then pointed to the stars outside the cave. His eyes grew distant, filled with sorrow. She realized he was speaking of his lost comrades, friends who would never return. He carried their memory like a heavy stone on his back. Eliara's heart softened. Though their worlds were different, their pain was the same. Both of them had lost everything. Both carried the duty of survival for those who could not. The next morning, danger returned. While crossing a clearing, they were spotted by enemy scouts. Shouts rang out and weapons were raised. David reacted instantly. He pulled Eliara behind a fallen tree and fired his weapon, forcing the scouts back. "Run!" he shouted, though. Eliara only understood the urgency in his voice. Holding Kaelin tightly, she followed as David led them deeper into the forest. The enemy chased close behind, their steps loud, their voices cruel. At the edge of a ravine, David stopped. The path ended in a sharp drop. The only way forward was across a thin rope bridge, swaying dangerously in the wind. Eliara's heart pounded. She looked at the bridge, then at David. It seemed impossible with a baby. But David's expression was firm. He motioned for her to go first. She stepped onto the bridge, gripping the ropes tightly. The wooden planks creaked under her feet. Kaelin whimpered softly, sensing the fear around him. Step by step, she moved forward. Behind her, David followed, his weapon firing back at the enemies who had reached the clearing. Halfway across, a bullet tore through the ropes. The bridge shook violently. Eliara nearly lost her balance. Kaelin cried out. Panic surged through her chest. David shouted, running forward. He dropped his weapon to grab the ropes and steady the bridge. With sheer strength, he kept it from breaking, while Eliara crossed to the other side. By the time she reached safety, the bridge was breaking apart. David still stood on it, holding the ropes against the weight of the attack. Eliara screamed his name, though she did not know she had spoken it. At the last moment, David leapt, landing hard on the ground beside her. The bridge collapsed into the ravine behind him, taking the enemies with it. He lay there, breathing hard, his face pale with exhaustion. Eliara rushed to him. Kaelin pressed close against her. She knelt at his side, touching his arm with trembling hands. For the first time, her voice was not filled with command, but with worry. David looked up at her and gave a small, tired smile. He was alive, though his strength was fading. She wanted to scold him for risking so much, but the words would not come. Instead, she whispered a single word in her language, the word for bravery. That night, after they found another shelter, Eliara stayed awake while David slept. She watched him carefully, remembering the moment he had held the bridge for her and Kaelin. No knight of her court had ever shown such sacrifice, and yet a human, a stranger, had given everything to protect them. For the first time, she began to see him not only as a guardian but as something more, a companion, an ally, perhaps even a friend. Kaelin stirred, and Eliara rocked him gently. Her eyes went to David again, resting by the fire. She knew their journey was not over. Danger still surrounded them, and the road ahead was long. But in her heart something had changed. The princess was no longer alone. The days passed slowly as David, Eliara, and Kaelin moved deeper into the wilderness. The forest gave way to hills, and the air grew colder. Each step carried them farther from the burning city, but not away from danger. Enemy patrols still searched. The land and whispers of the princess's survival had begun to spread. Eliara noticed the change first. Refugees were appearing in hidden camps among the trees. Frightened families, wounded soldiers, and villagers with little more than scraps to eat. They recognized her at once. Their eyes widened with hope, then confusion when they saw the human soldier walking beside her. Some of the refugees whispered angrily. "A human?" they muttered in their language. "How can the princess walk with him? How can she trust one of them?" Eliara lifted her chin proudly. She held Kaelin close, her heir and her future, and faced them with dignity. David stood quietly at her side, his weapon resting across his back. He did not understand their words, but he understood their stares. That night they rested among the refugees. Eliara sat with Kaelin in her lap, while voices rose around the fire. Some begged her to send David away. Others demanded she explain. At last Eliara stood. She raised her voice firm and clear. She pointed to herself and said, "Princess." Then she touched Kaelin's head. "Heir." Finally she gestured toward David. "Guardian." Her people murmured in shock. To name an outsider her guardian was something no ruler of her line had ever done. Yet Eliara's voice carried the weight of command. "He has protected us," she said in her language. "He has risked his life. He is with me." David, though he did not understand, saw the way her people looked at him afterward. The anger softened into confusion, then into reluctant silence. But the test was not over. The next day, raiders struck the refugee camp. Armed and ruthless, they poured out of the hills, attacking with fire and steel. The refugees panicked, scattering in fear. David reacted instantly. He grabbed his weapon and ran toward the danger, firing with precision. His voice rose in shouts, urging people to run to safety. Eliara watched him fight, not for his own survival, but for hers, for Kaelin's, and even for her people, though they had doubted him. He moved with skill and courage, standing his ground even as wounds marked his body. When one raider rushed toward a group of children, David threw himself between them, shielding them with his own body. He fought with desperate strength, refusing to fall. By the time the raiders were pushed back, the ground was littered with broken weapons and the camp was safe once more. David staggered back, his uniform torn, blood marking his sleeve. Eliara rushed to him, her heart pounding. She pressed her hand to his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Fool," she whispered in her own language, though her tone carried more care than anger. Around them, the refugees watched in silence. They had seen the human fight for them. They had seen him protect their children. Doubt began to fade, replaced by awe. That evening, Eliara stood before the survivors once more. Kaelin rested in her arms, quiet and calm after the battle. David stood beside her, weary but strong. My people, she said in her language. Her voice carrying across the camp. This child is our future, and this man, this human has become our shield. He is not our enemy. He is proof that honor can be found beyond our walls. She lifted Kaelin high, showing the child to all. The baby's small hands reached out, innocent and pure. Then she looked at David and placed her free hand over his shoulder, declaring him her protector in front of all. The refugees bowed their heads. For the first time, they saw not a human outsider, but a warrior chosen by their princess. That night, as the camp settled into uneasy peace, Eliara sat with David beside the fire. Kaelin slept between them. The flames danced in their eyes, reflecting the bond that had grown stronger with every trial. Eliara spoke softly, her voice gentle. "Guardian," she said, pointing at him. Then she touched her own chest. "Friend." David paused, then smiled. He repeated the word slowly. Friend. For Eliara, it was a turning point. No longer was this an alliance of necessity. It was something deeper. He had proven himself not only to her but to her people. She thought of the old stories her mother had told her as a child, stories of trust, loyalty, and bonds formed in times of despair. She had never believed them, until now. The road ahead was still uncertain. The enemy was powerful and her kingdom was in ruins, but as she looked at David sitting quietly with Kaelin's small hand resting on his arm, she felt a spark of hope unlike anything she had known since the war began. The child who once wept in the ruins was now a symbol of unity, and the soldier, who had once been a stranger, was now the shield of a princess. Eliara knew that everything had changed. The mountain air was thin and cold. Snow touched the peaks and the valleys below stretched wide, scarred by smoke and fire. Yet among the cliffs, hidden deep inside a natural fortress of stone, a camp of survivors gathered. They were the last of Eliara's people, soldiers, healers, farmers, and families who had escaped the destruction of the kingdom. When Eliara, Kaelin, and David arrived, the camp stirred with disbelief. Many had thought their princess was gone. Some fell to their knees in relief, whispering her name like a prayer. Others wept openly when they saw the child, still alive, resting peacefully in her arms. But just as before, whispers rose when they noticed David, a human standing beside their princess, her chosen guardian. Their voices carried doubt and suspicion. Eliara stood tall, her crown still broken, her robe still torn, but her spirit unbroken. She lifted Kaelin high so all could see. "This child," she declared in her language, "is the heir of our kingdom. And this man, this human, stood against death to keep us alive. Without him, neither I nor the heir would stand before you now." The people listened in silence. David stood quietly, his expression calm, though he felt the weight of their stares. He was an outsider in every way. Different skin, different eyes, a soldier from another world. Yet Eliara's words wrapped around him like a shield, protecting him even from the judgment of her people. Days passed in the mountain camp. Slowly, David began to earn the respect of the survivors. He repaired broken shelters, helped carry supplies, and trained young fighters to defend themselves. Though he spoke little of their language, his actions needed no translation. When danger threatened, he was always the first to stand, weapon in hand. At night, the fires glowed across the camp. Children gathered near him, curious about the stranger who fought like a warrior, yet spoke with such gentleness to the baby heir. Eliara often watched in silence, her heart steadying as she saw her people's fear turn into cautious acceptance. One evening, a council of elders gathered to speak with Eliara. They asked her how the kingdom could be rebuilt, how they could resist the enemy that still hunted them. She listened carefully, Kaelin asleep in her arms. Finally, she stood and addressed them all. "Our kingdom cannot rise by walls alone," she said. "We must rise by trust, by unity. Our enemy divided us, turned us against others, told us to fear what is different. But I tell you now, difference is not weakness. It is strength." She placed her hand on David's shoulder, her eyes fierce and proud. This human is proof. Where others fell, he stood. Where others doubted, he gave. He fought not because he owed us anything, but because he chose to. If one human can fight for us, then perhaps others can stand with us too. We cannot close our hearts. Not anymore. Her words settled into the hearts of her people. Some nodded slowly. Others wept quietly. The seed of hope had been planted. That night, as the camp grew quiet, David prepared his pack. He tightened the straps on his weapon and looked out toward the valley. Eliara noticed and walked to him. "You are leaving," she said softly, her words broken but clear enough. David nodded. He pointed toward the horizon, then to himself. His mission, his war, his duty, it was elsewhere. He believed his part in her story was finished. But before he could step away, Kaelin stirred. The child reached out, tiny fingers stretching toward David. Eliara watched as the soldier froze, his heart caught in the smallest of gestures. Eliara's voice was gentle, yet strong. "You cannot go," she said. "Not now. Not when my people look to you as they look to me. Not when Kaelin—" Her eyes softened. "Not when Kaelin reaches for you as if you are his own shield." David hesitated. He had told himself he was only a protector until she was safe. Yet looking at Eliara, at Kaelin, at the camp of survivors who now carried hope because of him, he realized something had changed. He was no longer just a soldier lost in a foreign war. He was part of something greater. He lowered his pack slowly. Eliara's lips curved into the faintest smile, rare, but filled with meaning. The days that followed became brighter. Together, Eliara and David began shaping the camp into more than a refuge. It became the seed of a new kingdom. Refugees trained, families rebuilt shelters, and scouts returned with news of others who wished to join them. Kaelin grew stronger, his laughter ringing through the camp like a promise of tomorrow. Sometimes, David carried him, the child resting against his chest with trust as natural as breathing. Other times, Eliara would watch quietly, her heart filled with emotions she could not yet name. One morning, as the sun rose golden over the snowy peaks, Eliara stood before her people with David at her side. She raised her voice so all could hear. "We are not broken," she declared. "We are not defeated. Our kingdom lives here, in every breath, in every step forward. And we will rebuild, not with fear, but with courage, not with hate, but with unity." The crowd cheered, their voices echoing across the mountains. And in that moment, David knew he had become part of their story forever. The princess and her heir had not only survived, they had found strength in the most unlikely bond. And the human soldier, who had once stumbled into ruins with nothing left, had found a home in the heart of a people who were no longer strangers. A new dawn had begun,